I grew up in Santa Mont, Louisiana, a place where the air always smelled like magnolias and diesel fuel, and where family was supposed to mean everything. At least, that's what they told the neighbors. Inside our house, family meant something else entirely. My parents, Dale and Marianne Boudreau, liked to put on a show. We were the picture-perfect family: 3 kids, a golden retriever, backyard BBQs every Sunday. But when the cameras came out, I learned quickly that I wasn't supposed to be part of the picture. Literally, I still remember the first time it happened. I must have been around 6. Grandma Edie was visiting from Baton Rouge, and Mom gathered everyone on the front porch for a group photo. The sun was setting behind us, casting everything in gold. I ran up, grinning, squeezing between my older brother and sister. Mom's smile tightened. She leaned down, smoothing my hair too hard. "Sweetie," she said through her teeth, "why don't you let the grown-ups have a picture first?" So I stepped aside, barefoot in the grass, watching as they laughed and posed without me. I thought maybe they'd call me back in for another shot. They never did. 2 years later, the older I got, the more invisible I became. Birthday parties, school concerts, even simple family dinners. The camera would click, and I'd find myself outside the frame. At first, I thought it was an accident. Then I started noticing the looks. The way Mom's mouth would pinch when I entered a room, the way Dad's hand would tighten around his beer bottle. I wasn't what they wanted. I wasn't what they pictured when they dreamed about a perfect Southern family. By the time I was 10, I stopped asking to be in pictures altogether. I stopped trying to belong. Some hurts don't scream, they just settle into your bones, heavy and cold. 5 years later, age 15, life got harder. Dad's auto repair business hit rough waters after a chain shop opened up 2 towns over. Money got tight. Mom's migraines got worse. Arguments exploded over the dinner table like landmines. I became the easy target, the reminder of everything that wasn't perfect. "You wouldn't understand," Mom snapped once when I asked why we couldn't afford new shoes. "You were never supposed to be here," Dad muttered under his breath another night, thinking I couldn't hear. I did. I heard every word. I started working odd jobs. Babysitting, washing dishes, anything to scrape together enough to buy my own clothes, my own notebooks for school. No one noticed. Or if they did, they didn't care. I was a ghost, living in the house my family called home. 3 months later. One night, after another screaming match over something stupid. Spilled milk, I think. I made a decision. I packed a duffel bag with everything that mattered to me. A worn denim jacket Grandma Edie gave me before she passed. A cracked leather sketchbook I filled with drawings no one ever saw. $73 in babysitting money. I left a note on the kitchen table. "Don't worry about me, you haven't for years." Then I slipped out the front door into the humid Louisiana night. No one chased me. 4 hours later, 2 a.m., I caught the Greyhound bus to Baton Rouge with shaking hands and a heart that felt both lighter and heavier than it ever had. At the station, sitting under flickering fluorescent lights, I realized something. I wasn't scared. I wasn't sad. I was free. For the first time in my life, I could choose where I belonged. 6 years later, age 21, freedom wasn't easy. I slept in shelters. I worked in diners and gas stations, saving every penny. I earned my GED in the evenings, too exhausted most nights to do anything but collapse into bed. But every step forward was mine. At 21, I earned a scholarship to a small art school in New Orleans. I specialized in graphic design, learning how to create the kind of beauty I had never been allowed to touch growing up. I made friends, real ones, not the be nice for church kind. I built a life from nothing, and I never once looked back at the Boudreau family. They had made their choice. I made mine. 9:17 a.m., one random Thursday. I was sitting at Café du Monde, nursing a café au lait, and sketching in my notebook when my phone buzzed. A message from an old classmate back in Saint Amant. "Hey, saw your face in the paper. Everything okay?" I frowned, clicking the link she sent. The headline almost made me laugh out loud. "Local family seeks missing daughter after tragedy strikes." Beneath it was a picture, an old-school portrait of me, braces and all. They had blasted my image across the state, begging for me to come home. The article painted a tragic scene. Dad's business had collapsed after a lawsuit. Mom was battling aggressive cancer. They were deep in debt, selling the family home. Their beloved daughter had vanished without a trace years ago, and they were now desperate to find her, for help, for healing, for redemption. They didn't tell the world they had driven me away. They didn't say a word about the years of silence, of exclusion, of casual cruelty, no. Now I was their missing piece. Their golden ticket. Their last hope. I stared at the article, rereading the words until they blurred into a smear of betrayal and disbelief. The gall of them. The pure, shameless audacity. After all those years of making me feel like I was less than nothing, suddenly I was the missing treasure. Veli temes needed viol. Suddenly they needed me to be the daughter they had refused to love. It was almost funny. Almost. But as I sat there under the bright Louisiana sun, the laughter died in my throat, replaced by something colder. Not rage. Not sadness. Something quieter. A hollow sort of justice. 2 hours later, I closed my sketchbook, drained the last of my coffee, and headed home. Every step felt heavier than the last. Inside my tiny apartment, a third-floor walk-up that smelled permanently of boiled crawfish and dust, I pulled out a shoebox from under my bed. The box was filled with scraps of the life I had left behind. A frayed friendship bracelet I made with a girl from 3rd grade. A yellowed photo of me riding a bicycle without training wheels. A postcard from Grandma Edie, sent the summer before she passed, that simply said, "Don't let them tell you who you are, Moncho." I hadn't opened the box in years. Now I sifted through it slowly, letting the memories sting and fade, like salt water on an old wound. 5 days later, the newspapers kept running the ad. My face, my childhood face, kept popping up in places I never expected. On the counter of the gas station where I bought coffee. Folded into the hands of strangers waiting for buses. Posted on bulletin boards in diners where I used to scrub dishes. Each time, it was like a slap. Each time, the pressure in my chest built higher. I knew they weren't looking for me because they missed me. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were drowning, and I was the only life raft they had left. That knowledge should have made the decision easy. And yet, it didn't. Because under all the hurt, all the anger, there was still that small, traitorous piece of me that remembered being 6 years old, standing barefoot in the grass, wishing they would call me back into the picture. 1 week later, decision time, I sat in Jackson Square, sketching the cathedral spires lazily, when my phone rang again. It was another message. This time from a woman I barely remembered, Mrs. Langston, a friend of my mom's from church. "Honey, if you see this, they're not doing well. They need you." Need. It was always about what they needed, never what they gave, never what they took. I closed my phone, stuffed it deep into my backpack, and stared up at the wide, blue Louisiana sky. Maybe it was time. Maybe it was time for them to finally see the daughter they had erased. Not the way they wanted to see her, but the way she truly was. Stronger. Colder. Unforgiving. 3 days later, I made a plan. Not to rush to their side like some lost lamb. Not to fall into their arms and pretend the past hadn't happened. No. I would go home on my terms. I would make them look me in the eye. I would let them feel every ounce of what they had thrown away. And when the moment came, when they asked for my help, for my mercy, I would decide if they were even worth saving. 2 weeks later, returning to Saint Amant. The bus ride back felt like traveling through a graveyard. Small towns blurred past the window, old gas stations, abandoned cotton fields, rusted water towers leaning against gray skies. Everything looked smaller than I remembered. More broken, more fragile. I stepped off the bus just past noon. The heat hit me like a hammer. Thick, wet, heavy, with the scent of mud and grass. Saint Amant hadn't changed much. But I had. I was no longer the girl they could push into the shadows. I was something else now. Something they had made, without even knowing it. 1:05 p.m., the old neighborhood. The streets looked the same. Cracked pavement, sagging porches, children playing barefoot with battered footballs. It was me who didn't fit anymore, an outsider in a town that had once pretended I didn't exist. I walked slowly toward my parents' house, the duffel bag slung over my shoulder, feeling heavier than it should have. The Boudreaux house used to be one of the nicest on the block. Fresh paint, a neatly trimmed yard, a bright red door that swung open to welcome gossiping neighbors and casserole-carrying church ladies. Now? The lawn was overgrown, weeds curling over the broken sidewalk. Paint peeled from the shutters, the porch light hung at a crooked angle, swinging slightly in the breeze. I stood across the street for a long moment, my heart thudding heavily in my chest. This was what they had become without me. This was what they had built when they decided I wasn't worth keeping. 1:10 p.m. crossing the street. I crossed the street slowly, the heat pressing down on me like a second skin. When I knocked, it took nearly a full minute before the door creaked open. Dad stood there, a ghost of the man I remembered. Thinner, grayer, eyes sunken deep into his face. For a moment, he just stared at me like he wasn't sure if I was real. Then he whispered, "Marie?" I nodded once. The look that passed over his face, a cracked mixture of guilt, hope, and raw desperation, would have satisfied the old, wounded part of me. But the woman standing there now? She felt almost nothing at all. 1:12 p.m. inside the house. The inside of the house smelled like sickness and old coffee. Mom sat on the faded floral couch, a quilt wrapped around her thin shoulders even though it was 90 degrees outside. She looked smaller, diminished somehow. The high, sharp woman who once hissed at me to stay out of the family photos was now a trembling shadow. When she saw me, tears welled in her eyes instantly. "Oh, baby," she rasped, reaching out a hand as if distance alone had erased everything. I didn't move to take it. I let the silence stretch long and thin between us, letting them sit in the discomfort they had earned. 1:20 p.m. The plea. "We're so sorry," Mom whispered. Dad nodded quickly, too quickly, like if he just agreed enough everything would reset. "We made mistakes," Dad said. "We didn't realize. We didn't know how much you—" "Stop," I said, my voice low and flat. They froze. I set my bag down by the door, arms crossed over my chest. "You knew exactly what you were doing," I said. "You knew when you pushed me out of pictures. You knew when you left me standing outside of family gatherings. You knew when you let me walk out that door and didn't even call after me." Mom let out a small, broken noise, part sob, part denial. "But you were always part of our family," she said weakly. We didn't know how to show it." I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I said, "You showed it just fine." 1:30 p.m., the offer. They laid it out like a transaction. Mom's cancer treatments were draining every cent they had left. Dad's bankruptcy had left them drowning in legal fees. The house was mortgaged to the rafters. They needed help. They needed me. Specifically, they needed the money I had carefully saved over years of working 2 and 3 jobs. The success they never celebrated. The life they never believed I could build. "We just want our family back," Dad said, voice cracking. The lie tasted bitter in the air between us. 1:35 p.m., the choice. For a moment, I let myself imagine it. Writing the check. Moving back into this rotting house. Sitting by Mom's bedside, spoon-feeding her soup like nothing had ever happened. Pretending that love could be conjured out of desperation. Pretending that absence hadn't already hollowed us out. I could do it. I could save them. But I wouldn't. Some ghosts deserved to stay dead. I bent down, picked up my duffel bag, and slung it over my shoulder again. "I'm not your family," I said quietly. And then, I walked out the door. 10 minutes later, on the sidewalk. I didn't look back. If they called after me, I didn't hear it. If they cried, I didn't see. The sun was brutal overhead. The cicadas screaming in the trees. But I felt strangely cold. Weightless. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't raged. I had given them exactly what they gave me, all those years ago. A silent absence. A missing piece that could never be replaced. 2:15 p.m., walking away. I walked for blocks, the soles of my sneakers kicking up dust, my skin sticky with sweat. But inside, I felt numb. There was no satisfaction, not really. No thunderous victory music swelling in the background. Just silence. The kind of silence that follows a funeral. I had given them exactly what they gave me. Absence. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't slammed the door. I had simply left, the way they had left me, all those years ago, standing small and invisible on the edges of family pictures. 3 hours later, on a park bench. I ended up sitting on a rusted park bench outside the old library where I used to sneak in after school. Back when home didn't feel like home. I watched the sun sink lower in the sky, the light turning syrupy and gold, thinking about the girl I used to be. That girl would have done anything for a scrap of love, a smile, a hand pulling her into the frame. I mourned her quietly, like mourning a childhood friend you lost touch with. Because she was gone now. And maybe that was the real price of survival. 2 days later, back in New Orleans. When I returned to New Orleans, it was with lighter bags and heavier thoughts. I stepped back into my studio apartment, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed onto the threadbare couch. For hours, I stared at the ceiling fan, spinning lazily above me, the hum of the city leaking in through the cracked window panes. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt powerful. Instead, all I felt was tired. Winning, it turned out, was lonelier than I expected. 1 week later, the world kept spinning. I returned to work, diving back into design projects and freelance gigs. I lost myself in client deadlines, color palettes, typography adjustments, small, controllable things. My phone buzzed constantly. Messages from Mrs. Langston, voicemails from Pastor Gentry at the old church, even an email from a cousin I hadn't heard from in a decade, all pleading variations of the same thing. They need you. You're their only hope. Family forgives. I deleted them all without answering. Family should have forgiven when I was 6 years old and crying on the porch. Not now. Not when it was convenient. 1 month later, news from Saint Amant. Word drifted in, as it always does in small towns. Dad finally sold the house for a fraction of what it was worth. Mom's health declined faster than expected. They moved into a cramped, assisted living center on the edge of town. The same place they used to whisper about in pity when someone else's family wound up there. Poetic, almost. But even that symmetry felt hollow. I didn't wish them suffering. I didn't wish them joy, either. I wished them nothing. And that, in the end, was worse. 2 months later. Reflection. One rainy night, as I sat on the fire escape, watching the water sluice down the alleyways of New Orleans, I realized something. The real revenge wasn't in watching them fall. It was in knowing I had risen without them. It was in the life I had built. One sketch, $1, one lonely night at a time. A life they never believed I could have. They had tried to erase me. But I had painted myself back into existence, brighter and bolder than they ever allowed me to be. And now? Now they would have to live with the empty space they created, just like I had. 3 months later, a letter arrives. One afternoon, I found a letter wedged into my mailbox, battered and rain-soaked. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Mom's. I stared at it for a long time, my keys dangling from my fingers, the humid New Orleans heat pressing against my skin. Finally, I tore it open with the corner of my thumbnail. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in shaky blue ink. Murray, we don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that now, in ways I didn't before. We failed you. Not just once, but every day, in ways too small to see at the time, but so big they swallowed you whole. I'm sorry we erased you. You were the brightest thing we ever had, and we were too blind to see it. I hope you find the happiness we couldn't give you. Mom, there were water stains along the edges. Maybe from the rain. Maybe from tears. Maybe it didn't matter. That night, I sat on the windowsill, the city buzzing around me. Jazz music floating in from Bourbon Street, the rumble of streetcars in the distance. I held the letter lightly between my fingers, like it might crumble if I gripped it too hard. Part of me wanted to forgive her. Part of me wanted to tear the letter into 1,000 pieces. But mostly I just felt tired. Forgiveness wasn't a door I could fling open in a single night. It wasn't even a destination. It was a long, uneven road. I wasn't sure I was ready to walk. And maybe that was okay. 6 months later, moving on, I never answered the letter, not because I hated her, but because some things are better left unfinished. Instead, I poured everything into my work. I opened my own tiny design studio downtown, a little storefront with a cracked window and a hand-painted sign that said Second Chances. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't grand, but it was mine, built from the ground up by hands nobody ever bothered to photograph. 1 year later, a different life. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about them. I wonder if Dad still watches football on Sundays. If Mom still hums old church hymns under her breath when she's scared. If they ever sit together in that cramped room at the assisted living center and wonder how it all went so wrong. But I don't dwell on it. Because dwelling is a way of handing your life back to the people who didn't know what to do with it the first time. Final reflection. They wanted a perfect family photo, something glossy and bright they could show the world. They thought cutting me out would make the picture prettier. But real families aren't perfect. Real love isn't neat and staged. It's messy. It's hard. It's choosing someone over and over again, even when it would be easier to pretend they aren't there. They didn't choose me. So I chose myself. And that, in the end, was the clearest picture of all. What do you think about Marie's decision? Was she too harsh? Or was this the only way to truly protect herself? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt stories about real family.